Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Access to Democracy, back with you. And it has been with you for 12 years now. And during that 12-year period, which I've been hosting, we've had one guest who has appeared more often than any other guest. I'm not quite sure why, but he's back with us again because he wants to keep his record intact for the most appearances. Former Senator Jim Carlson, who has recently announced that he is running for re-election, and welcome back.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Jim served 4 years as the state senator for District 38, Senate District 38 here in Minnesota. And as a matter of fact, last week we had the mayor of Eagan who has announced that he is seeking the same post.
That's right.
So, which came as a surprise to some people, and I mentioned it to him. But what was your decision like in determining that you want to seek the post again?
Well, it really wasn't a major change in attitude. A person is a candidate whenever they have their filing open with the Campaign Finance Board. We ended our 2010 campaign with a positive balance in it, and the intention of a lot of the senators that did lose their seats in the last election was to just kind of reconnoiter, figure out what they're going to do, and our official responses was we're not changing our campaign finance status.
Which means that we're still intact, and we probably are considering running again.
Yes.
As most of them are.
That's right. And if you look at the law in Minnesota, as long as you have that campaign finance account open, you are a candidate. You are officially a candidate, and you fall under the rules that are Campaign Finance Board rules. So it's you can take a look at any of those filings, and you can say that these folks are still candidates. So it was a matter of that, and a lot of the senators who did lose are still considering, but only when you have an opponent that for the endorsement that will announce, then you're really rather forced to go public with your position. We had already had some campaign meetings, and so it was just a matter of a formality to say, yes, I'm in it.
Now, when Mayor McGuire was in last week, and I asked him, why did you choose to run? He said, number one, because I can win, and Senator Carlson has lost an election. And he also said that I have a better record for working with both sides of the aisle. So maybe you want to respond to either or both of those. The same question for you.
Well, in the matter of winning, I've been in 3 partisan races, and I've won one of them against an incumbent. And I think that does count for something, where you actually have been in a partisan race, and these partisan races are not the same as a mayor race, where, for instance, the candidate is not even a contestant. These were highly financed races where there was a lot of money from outside groups. And in the case of the 2010 race, there was a lot of errors that were made primarily by our caucuses in the party, and we know what those were, and we're gearing up to overcome those. And as far as working with the other side, I've worked with both sides also, but in Eagan here we have a large contingent contingency of people that are supportive of the things that I stand for, the environment, for education, especially education, and also the healthcare. And those kinds of things are not really complete yet. We did get a lot done in transportation, although there's more to do. These are the kinds of things that add to prosperity of the region. Now, every one of my bills that I passed or sponsored had someone from the other side on it. So it's not a matter that one person works much better with others. That's not correct.
Now, one thing that I asked Mayor McGuire last week, what differences in philosophy did he have with you, and/or what differences in philosophy did he have with present Senator Daley? He didn't really respond in so far as you are concerned, but he talked about some of the differences he had with Daley. Either of those questions that you'd like to answer?
Well, for one thing, Mayor McGuire is on the same team that I'm on, so we need to support each other. So that's real important. My philosophies go back to the reasons that I won in 2006, and that is that we need to invest in our human infrastructure and our physical infrastructure. Both of those are still needing to be done. We had a governor that would not communicate or would not cooperate with the legislature. We did get a lot of things done, but some of those things have been reversed, and obviously here we are on June 19th? 17th today, and we don't have a budget yet, and we're facing a shutdown because some folks have their heels dug in very deeply, and the likelihood is that we are going to have a shutdown because there's so much work yet to do. Now, this is the biggest philosophy that I differ from the people that actually did win last year, and I think we need to overcome that. I think there's a lot to do, and I think, obviously the Eagan residents still think that we need to have some changes made.
Now, did Daley vote down the line in terms of budget items?
Yes, I don't know every one of his votes, but yes, largely, and Ted is a nice fellow. There's no two ways about it. Mike McGinn was a nice fellow. Then I ran against him. People are, they have some ideologies, but then they maybe respond differently to their parties. I was never told when I was in the legislature, in the Senate, how to vote. Not once. I voted my heart. I voted my district. I voted very often with the caucus, but very seldom did I ever vote against the majority of the caucus. But by that same token, I never voted just lockstep. And unfortunately, that's what Senator Daley has done, is vote lockstep.
It's interesting that you raised that, because I recall a vote in which 6 Republicans, while you were in the legislature, crossed over and voted with the Democrats for a very important bill. And the result was that Pawlenty dictated, and ultimately the party did run primaries and knock most of those people out of office simply because they didn't vote in lockstep, as you described it.
You're absolutely right, and those kinds of threats are there today yet. Arnie Carlson, if
on the Republican side.
Yes, on the Republican side. Arnie Carlson gives a very good speech about that. I've heard it 3 times now, where he talks about who is in charge up there. We have the governor who has been elected, we have legislature that's been elected, but then we have Tony Sutton, who is the party chair of the Republican Party and has issued threats to say that if any of their people don't toe the line, then what they're going to do is run somebody against them in a primary. So it's a threat similar to what happened in 2008 for the transportation bill, that if people don't toe the line, then they will be removed from their ranking positions, perhaps even removed from their committees, and perhaps have some sort of primary opponent. And that's just because they want to make sure that they keep their the caucus tied together, and Tony Sutton is pulling the strings on it.
That's really interesting, because when you take the oath of office. You take the oath of office to follow the Constitution, but you're also there to represent the interest of your constituents. And here you have somebody telling you, I don't care what your constituents want, I don't care what anything else that's involved matters. You will do what we tell you to do, or we will throw you out of office.
That's right, yes. That's really not the way our democracy should work. Our democracy should be that people elect me, and I always say that there's three things. There's the things that are very important to my representation, my candidacy. Those are not negotiable. Then there are things that perhaps I need to have more information from the constituents, and maybe I should vote for them, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should vote for them under certain conditions. And then there are things that I really let the constituents tell me exactly how to vote, because this is what my job is there, is to represent Senate District 38 in Eagan. This is the sole reason why I went to the legislature.
That's another thing that raises in my mind something. You had a lot of meetings with constituents where you would come to the library and people would come in and talk. It seemed very frequent. To my knowledge, the incumbent has had one during 2 years. Now, I might be wrong about that. There might have been two, but I don't think that there were two. I know of one because I was at it. He did have some Saturday morning listening sessions, which were really, because I was at one of those also, kind of fruitless, where you spend 20 minutes with one constituent and you only have 2 hours, and there are 6 other people out there who are given short shrift because you only spent so much time with one person.
Well, I want to be fair that the opponents have only been in office since January 1st, but the office hours, those are office hours being held at the library. I held office hours 7 days a week. 7 days a week up at the Capitol. If anyone wanted to come up to the Capitol to meet us, they were welcomed. And there were no filters. Anyone that wanted to come in could get access to my office. All they needed to do was schedule a time to come up there. And then, like you say, we had numerous town hall meetings or listening sessions where anybody could come, anybody could hear the other side. They could come there, argue them amongst themselves, argue with me, anything like that. I always brought handouts. I brought things that hopefully educated people. In fact, that was one of the reasons for having those, is that, there's so much information that we run across up there, and really the constituents need to have some of that. They need to get it in their hands. So I think, and I lost track actually over the 4 years, I think I had something in excess of 24 announced listening sessions. So it was very, very frequent.
How would you describe the current majority's agenda, legislative or otherwise? What is the GOP agenda? What is their opinion of the middle class?
Now, that's a very interesting question, in that the GOP in Minnesota and also in other states actually has 2 factions in it. There's a faction in Minnesota. Some of them are newly elected, a couple of them have been around for a while, but they are the ideologues. They want to have things exactly their way or the highway. In fact, in this latest budget negotiation, you've heard some of them say that $34 billion is too much. What we want is $30 billion, whereas the leadership in the GOP Senate has said 34 is our number, and we'll agree to that. And
we're talking about budget numbers.
We're talking about the budget for the next 2 years. And what's interesting with that is that the veterans, the people that have been around for a while, the Amy Kochs, the Michelle Fischbach, those are senators. Some of those folks have been around for a while, and they know that this is not going to go well unless they start to negotiate. And if they start to negotiate, then this other faction is going to take a powder. They will not participate.
They'll vote against their own.
They'll vote against their own
caucus.
Yeah. And they've made that very clear, that they're going to vote against their own caucus. So that somewhat puts the veterans, the people that know that this is going to be serious and needs some resolution, needs some negotiation, it puts them into a very awkward position where they're going to have to go to the Democrat caucus and try to get some votes from them to make sure that they have a majority of votes to pass a piece of legislation for the budget. So I mean, it's all a lot of inside baseball, but actually the ideologues will hurt their own situation by being so unmovable.
So that almost $2 billion differential, who will get hurt the most if in fact we don't get that $2 billion added to what has been proposed? And there's no question there are going to be cuts. We know that there are going to be cuts. We're trying to protect certain things, and when I say we, I mean the majority of people in this state want certainly public safety protected and education protected and health care certainly protected, the environment. But who's going to get hit with that $2 billion if in fact the ideologues, as you described them, get their way?
Yeah, the spreading of the pain will be just immense. Now, of course, one of the biggest, and we have the early budget, we have the budget that the governor has acceded to, and then we've had a response that was actually issued yesterday.
Basically a non-response,
basically,
really.
yeah. And really what it was cutting back on the amount of what they call tax expenditures. Tax expenditures is when you give someone a tax cut. And so you have to pay for that tax cut by cutting back on something else. And so what they did yesterday is they said, okay, we're not going to have some of these tax cuts, and we'll use that $200 million to spread onto some other areas. And unfortunately, $200 million just doesn't go anywhere with a $34 billion budget. So what they essentially did was not change the total number. Now, the people that will be hurt, that's difficult to exactly put numbers on it. The biggest thing that's going to be hurt is education, because in neither the governor's budget nor the legislature's budget is the payback of that almost $2 billion that we did the shift. We shifted out payments to schools. So they are still being hurt. Now that's a big hurt. Also, anyone that's going on to post-secondary, because post-secondary, the University of Minnesota has been cut, and I don't have the number at my tip of my tongue, but it results in a 5% tuition increase. So students will be hurt. And as you well know from MCTC, there's a lot of students that are now dropping out because they run out of money. They're dropping out because their debts have gotten too large. And this is like we've been saying for a long time, when you come out of school, you should have as low a debt as possible, because then you can get involved in the economy. Students that have big debt will not be buying houses, they'll not be buying brand new cars, all of those things. So it's really a hurt to the entire economy.
And of course, not only the economy, but education, which has been a foundation, which has been a bedrock of this state, which has been one of the reasons that we have more corporations here, Fortune 500 corporations headquartered here, and high tech here. All of that is endangered.
Absolutely. Yes. When we go back to the Minnesota Miracle, what that was something that took property taxes and lowered them and put a lot of the tax collections or the new revenue onto high-income earners. And high-income earners, now I heard something the other day that is really puts it into a nutshell, that it's not wealthy people or high earners it's the wealthy earners don't cause a good economy, they're the result of it. So when we have a good economy, people get wealthy. It's when, it's like the old Henry Ford said, I have to have my workers be able to buy my products. So I have to be able to pay them to be able to buy my products. And when he increased the pay of his workers, his sales went up of Model Ts. And that's something that we all have to recognize, is that we need consumers. We need consumers that can afford to buy. And if we don't educate them, then they won't have that earning potential that educated people can do. So it's all wrapped up into a very long and complicated formula.
Now, I went down a list of different topics with Mayor McGuire last week, and I want to cover the same topics with you. Obviously, you're both going to be back for additional sessions, hopefully.
Sure.
I can't guarantee that, but you can. But we'll start with the constitutional amendment on gay marriage. What's your position on gay marriage?
Well, boy, you loaded me, Alan. I said, what I always say when a male asks me that, I say, well, I'm flattered, but I'm already married. So my position is that marriage is threatened by divorce. It's divorce that's hurting marriage. My wife and I have been married for almost 41 years. We have lots of gay friends. Some of them have gone to other states or Canada to actually go through the marriage ceremony. I have yet to have anyone give me one reason why that threatens my marriage. My marriage of 41 years to one woman has never been threatened by any of my gay friends. Now, we have a revolution that's happening. For instance, all young people watch a program, and I'm sorry I don't watch it, I've never seen it, called Glee. And that is about evidently high school students or young people where there are gay people in the program. One of the most popular programs that is on television right now is Modern Family, where there's a gay couple that has a son. Now, people who are watching these programs, people who are more socially aware of what is going on, are seeing this change of attitude. In Egan High School, the prom king is a gay boy. So this is a first.
Well, the fact of the matter is, this will not be a question 10 years from now that we'll be talking about, because the younger generation is smart enough to know that sexual preference doesn't threaten anybody.
Yes.
And we hear all sorts of terrible statements about how it's threatened, but we know scientifically and otherwise that that's completely false. But I want to move on.
Well,
what's your position on abortion?
Let me say, first of all, that I am absolutely for marriage equality. That is something that is coming. It's, maybe this is going to be an issue that will bring out some voters that are scared. But in my case, I think that what I want is to make sure that people who love each other can be in a marriage ceremony. And there is absolutely no way that gay people today can be married and have the same inheritance advantages that a married heterosexual couple can have.
We've got to get to some other questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Attempts to tighten restrictions on abortion came up in this legislature. What would your position be on that?
Having an abortion is one of the most serious decisions a woman can ever be confronted to. And there are people that, and I call people that, there's no such thing as pro-life, other than I'm pro-life also.
I think everybody is pro-life.
Yeah, and I don't know anyone that's pro-death right now, but I think that we have to look at the decision as being exclusively between the woman, her family and supporters, her God, and her doctor. And that is something that I think that I don't want anyone. Obviously, my wife and I are in our 60s, but if we were young and there was a problem with a delivery or something that, a pregnancy that threatened my wife's life, I want to make that decision with her. I don't want the government making that decision, and I don't want the government going after the doctor that does whatever we tell them to do.
Healthcare. In fact, the mayor said last week, I know that you, speaking of me, and Senator Carlson are both for single payer, and I didn't want him to speak for you. Yes, I would prefer single payer, and if not, universal health care, rather than have the hundreds of thousands of people who are uninsured that we have in this state. What is your position on health care?
Well, I've been for single-payer universal health care. Single-payer doesn't always just mean one payer, but it means that the money is collected and distributed like they do in Europe. Universal health care is for everyone. Now, I have less than a year and I'll be in a single-payer universal system, and that's called Medicare. Everybody is going to go into Medicare that lives past the age of 65.
Which runs at between 2.5% to 4%.
Overhead, yes.
As opposed to administration costs
Yeah.
of up to 30%, where executives, and I mentioned this last week, walk out with golden parachutes of $1.8 billion and have salaries approaching $1 million.
That's right.
Which is money that's not going into the healthcare system.
And one of the big misconceptions that it exists here in Egan is that the Blue Cross Blue Shield will go away if we have single-payer universal health care, and that's not correct. We're going to be adding a lot more people under the healthcare umbrella, and there is always going to be payments for services. All of our health care for people that are not in the military, not in the VA, all of our health care is done by private providers. So the bills go to private providers, and it gives you the choice of your hospital, of your doctor, all of that, and then someone's got to pay the bill. And that's what Blue Cross Blue Shield does very well right now. They even do it for Medicare. Plus, there's going to be some what they call the supplementals. So if you want to be insured for, let's say, pregnancy when you're 67, something like that, because you might have a younger wife, something like that, you can do that with a supplemental. So there will be supplementals that will always be sold, and they'll always exist, and we'll have insurance companies for the foreseeable future.
Now, we only have time for some bullet point answers because we've used up the time here. Photo ID for voting, yes or no?
No.
Okay.
We can't eliminate older people from voting.
The Shoot First law to make it easier for people to fire at intruders on their property, yes or no?
Well, you got to remember that one includes an automobile, shooting out of your automobile at someone. So absolutely not.
The Legacy Amendment, repealing the Legacy Amendment.
No, that was one of the most popular ballot initiatives we've ever had in Minnesota. So no, we don't want to repeal that.
Now, you had a lot of union support, as well as other people who supported you actually in your campaigns. So do you have any reason to think that you're going to have less union support at this point?
Not at all, no. In fact, it will be greater because now I've never been in a union, but I recognize that the union movement has made benefit changes and compensation achievements that everyone in the country has benefited from. So I recognize that. I recognize that my vacation and my benefits and my health care, all of that was worked for by unions. And I've told them that this is very important to me, that we keep those kinds of coverages and protections.
And it's important to me that we get off in 30 minutes, and we are just breathing down the pike there. Jim Carlson, good luck. And we obviously will be seeing more of you in the months to come.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
Al.